Welcome to San Diego Comic-Con 2023. Screen Rant is here with Kate Hawley, costume designer from Lord of the Rings of Power, and a recent Emmy nominee.
I know.
Congratulations.
I was saying to Lindsay in the car, I was going, oh yeah, I woke up to everybody going, hey, guess what? You've got one. And so it was a lovely surprise.
I was gonna say that was me. My first question. What was your reaction? Were you like, of course that's gonna happen? Duh, it's me. Or
not normally. I think most artists and creators sort of always deal with sort of I've been found out the fraud thing, but it's a lovely thing to be nominated.
Absolutely.
For sure.
I have to say, you have done work on some of my favorite projects from all different kinds of genres, like Crimson Peak.
Yeah, that usually throws people when it's a different genre.
Yeah, exactly. So many. I was like, Crimson Peak, and then Pacific Rim, and now Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So what is your general approach to an expanse? Like, because all of those are like projects that are really like fully immersed in a different world of some kind.
Yeah, I think that's what I realized quite late, that's actually, it's not necessarily what the project is. It's not necessarily the time period, and that I worked out early on that the world building is something I especially love, and the directors that I'm working with, it's so much part of the chemistry. It's like a marriage of kinds, right? So, but I love the world building. I've always been one of those kids that had my head buried in fantasy books, and particularly Lord of the Rings and, Ursula Le Guin and all of those wonderful writers, just to have this other reality, which I think taps into our environment and world and ritual, and I think people need that in their lives. So my approach generally is, it's doesn't matter what's written on the page, it's the process. Well, it does matter, but it's the process of who you're working with and that chemistry, and then the world building follows from that. And I approach it from all kinds of levels, from the dream time of it to the real research, where it is in the history of the context of the world, and the character. So there's a lot of. That's a short version, but you're almost like a forensic detective, whatever world you're in, So when I was in the world of Suicide Squad, I read all the DC comics, all 58 ones talking about Harley, and that Lord of the Rings, same thing. You read all the. I mean, that's massive tombs to get through.
All the Lord of the Rings.
You have to do your due diligence and do it. So you immerse yourself, and then you sort of somewhere through that into the ether comes where you're going.
Yeah.
And, obviously, in this case, showrunners, and in other cases, your director, they have their vision. So we all come to the project with interpretations of things, and then it's about the collaboration and how you work through to see the vision that's wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you could be something of like an anthropologist, especially with Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Because it's like, look at this civilization that came right before the one you know about.
And then I'd be going to Daniel or whatever, we had massive amounts of research, but inevitably it would be, it's a star. In question to anything, what is the symbol? It would be a star. No. But yeah, you have to do that. And then it's understanding who your actors are and why they've been cast, and allowing that interpretation, particularly in this world. We're in a different age. We're not in the third age. So, our characters are not 6,000 years old when it comes to the elves. They're more like 3,000.
So younglings.
And some people say, they never change. But I do think one perspective of looking at this is that elves have had the knowledge of 6,000 years to grow up and learn and accept their faults. At the beginning, they're more like in the Silmarillion, more like Greek gods. They make mistakes. They're not without fault. And I think that's a wonderful way to look at that. They're not perfect beings. There's it's much more sort of, on a, in line with the Greek mythologies and things where they do terrible things to each other in the first age, and so we're sitting in an interesting place where they haven't yet become the people we know in the third age and dearly love. And I think it's quite a difficult thing to balance, that journey, because, when we read the Lord of the Rings book, it's so complete. And in this world, it isn't. It has a very different tone, but you still have to find somewhere that allows people to relate to it. Otherwise, it doesn't feel like that. And, it's something you're always trying to sort of balance. I don't think the work's ever complete, and I still look back at other projects and go, I could have done this, or, so it's a never ending, there's so many choices. How many versions of that Shakespeare Macbeth that you've seen amazing interpretations of, and all are interesting and have different points. So I think it's, it's quite an interesting process.
Absolutely. Yeah. You mentioned the elves, and I feel like they're really the characters that we know so well.
Yeah.
like you said, in like their future.
Yeah.
But how do you really get into the specifics of like, this is where Galadriel is, and this is the way, like you've mentioned movement and sound are all really significant aspects of building that character. How do you incorporate that into the design of her costumes and her own evolution throughout the season?
Well, again, we had to understand the second age that we're in. You had to look at where the character falls in the third age, you know, and she's a lady, the Lady of Lothlorien, and then we look in the first age where she's come from. So you have to kind of look at the character arc on a scale of 6,000 years. And then you sort of, and very much it was, you know, working off the script. So the script as it developed depicted Galadriel this way. And so my job is to interpret that and work with our actress, because they all come with their own, you know, physicalities, interpretations. And so you work closely with that. And we had moments where there were still elements where she evoked a little bit of the Great Lady. You know, so we might see a tiny bit of that to come, but there's a greater physicality with this Galadriel. And so we had to work sort of hard to sort of find moments that still became our kind of magic, because the showrunners wanted a different, that word magic is a big thing. And I think it's constantly a balance to try and achieve it. But in this world, they wanted them to feel very real, and it felt more like a court of King Arthur, where people fall on their swords. You know, they're not perfect beings at all. But also, you know, we use a lot of references from Valinor, and you know, the whole imagery Tolkien has of those heroes with, you know, stars, you know, reflected on their raiment, and you know, born on shores of pearls. And we took all of these images and worked it in, you know, trying to use the images of water and stars and light, but it's all in Tolkien's language. Every time he you know, depicts a character or references it, there's not a lot of, you know, they wore this, but there's a lot of his cloak reflects this, or you know, so it's a very organic process. And you know, we tried to create light with the costumes and reflect it, and have a more organic texture and relate all of these characters, not just the elves, but all of them, back within their materiality of the worlds as Tolkien described them. And they're slightly different from what we've seen before, but it was trying to achieve a rawer, more classical image.
Yeah, I love that. And speaking of like organic, you talked about being inspired by nature.
Yes.
In the process of development. And there's certain aspects that really are like, you feel the nature reflected in the outfit and back and forth, like especially the Harfoots, who are nomads, and that you see them, you know, like traveling in their environment and like almost dressed like their environment. Yeah. And even in the Southlands, like you feel the heat of what is going to be Mordor in the outfits.
Well, it's atmosphere too. I mean, when I say we based it in nature, Tolkien was all about that, Tolkien's work. And so we actually did an exercise, you know, how do you tackle something this big? And it can get overwhelming. So we treated it with broad brushstrokes at the beginning, and we had this concept room, you know, this locked room, and we had tables everywhere, and each culture had its own environment set up, and we would add textures. You know, we had stones and semi-precious stones for the dwarves, and you know, scorched earth and elements for that. And for the Harfoots, we had berries, and we looked at dyes and vegetable dyes. So we started to build up the world of each culture and race, and then we were able to see the distinctions between them, you know, because it's like a giant mapping that has to happen. So and the Harfoots, that image of them being these sort of nomadic people, but some of the colourings, you know, the greens and that still echoed where we end up in the Shire, and you know, there's something that's still got to be, you know, they're Harfoots, there's still got to be that hobbity thing, and you know, but we wanted these guys to feel wilder and more elemental in that. So it was sort of, there was a lot of sort of, you know, almost sort of that sort of Tarkovsky treatment where it's a bit more in the elements, really, I guess.
Yeah. Now you've left.
It's a big question.
Yeah,
so I could go on forever on that stuff. Yeah.
But you've left kind of like a path for future generations of costume designers on the Rings of Power. But what are some of like the top 3 elements that just have to be included like every season from now on?
Oh, that's a big answer. Stars. I mean, you know, the elves stay constant in there, and it's sort of the place we were in at the beginning was, you know, Bayona and Patrick and JD wanted this to be the golden age of elves and dwarfs. So I guess, you know, there's certain elements that, I mean, are Harfoots and hobbits ever Harfoots and hobbits without that element of green and nature? And they're like our ancestors and that. So I guess there's certain elements, like the stars with the elves, that would stay constant in that world. And then, but it's they've got a massive evolution over 5 seasons. It's a lot of work.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. And thankfully, they have your footprint from the season 1. I mentioned Crimson Peak earlier.
Yes.
And I loved your work with Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, yes.
I know
He's quite a treat.
He's building his monster. He's stepping into the monsterverse
Yeah.
with Frankenstein.
Yes.
Is it true that you are a part of that?
It could be. Yes.
It could be. And if you were, what vision would you share with him for Frankenstein?
I think it's usually the other way around. Your director shares their vision. Look, it's always playtime with Guillermo, so it's a joy to be part of that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I hope that you enjoy your Comic-Con.
Thank you.
I hope
Thank
that you
you.
bask in the glow of
I'm just
your
always
success.
more impressed with what everybody manages to pull out. I think it's amazing. I go, oh, you could come and work for me. Can you do it in 3 days, though?
There you go.
Yeah.
Thank you
you
so much. Have
Thank
a
you
great
very much.
weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.